Go.
Well, it's a bienvenue. Welcome to the third in our 4 property podcasts this week. This is Property Quorum, and a slightly reduced field of view, but still exceptional talent here, of course. Hamish McClade, Search Convey, who sits there surveying everything from his lofty throne. And of course, Silas J. Leith of WikiWham, a person who is a social commentator on the property scene, has the exceptional WikiWham website. Do go and check it out if you're a property professional, where this podcast also goes, as well as on YouTube. And by the way, I just promote the fact that all of our property podcasts are grouped together on the Spilling the Proper Tea channel. Yes, it's supposed to be funny. And please go and find it there. You'll find some excellent bun fights there of Property Quorum, of course, all the other property podcasts that Hamish and I do together. Now, today's topic is an interesting one, and I have to say, I've already had my viewpoint roundly and radically reshifted by Hamish this morning in short order. Ignoring the Ombudsman, the consequences. You say, we're all drummed into us that the Ombudsman, for every particular vertical that may be out there, is the final bastion of justice. But it turns out I may be wrong. Hamish, would you care to take us away?
Well, yes. What we're actually speaking about really is purely quangos, regulation, new bodies checking on old bodies, and old bodies checking on new bodies, and some people deciding they'd actually like to sort of use their weight to actually demonstrate how powerful they are, when indeed they have sort of little power. And the opposite way, when the Ombudsman should be acting, the Ombudsman doesn't act at all. When the thing running through the whole of everything is this wondrous term sort of regulation. We have so many scenarios that arise that if we had an Ombudsman that was actually going to act on behalf of the innocent, on behalf of those that matter, and genuinely look into things, instead of one which is basically, it's a bit like, somebody driving more than 20 miles an hour. They're driving at 21 miles an hour in a perfectly calm and quiet street, is a bit different to somebody driving at 75 miles an hour down the same street. Yet they're all speeding. Whereas in actual fact, the 21 miles an hour, you're lucky to be able to get to that speed down some of these streets. But you just have this whole regulation thing. It's all cut and dried. It's not investigated. It's not decided what has brought about this particular situation, which had the Ombudsman, that surely is what the Ombudsman ought to be doing, to actually looking at the path, a clearer path through things. And what we have so far, but with this particular sort of government, it's not unusual for other governments as well, but this one particularly, we just have so many different ombudsmen for so many different things, so many changes in the law. And instead of just nudging people and say, hey, look, guys, what we need to do, and this is why we're doing it, what happens all of a sudden, it's not like a portcullis. Down it goes, even while somebody's trying to get through it. And it'll sort of flatten them. And unfortunately, we rarely get to see the opportunity, or rarely see, not so much the opportunity, we rarely get to see what the investigation's about. We just see the outcome. And what we've got is a scenario here that they're asking the question, what happens when the rulings are simply ignored? They might not necessarily be ignored. Our housing minister, or ex-housing minister, I should say, demonstrated that she didn't understand what the consequences were, what she's being told. I'm not suggesting that's an escape route for her. She should have known that better, of course. And many cases people should. But there are nudges that people can be given.
I would jump in and say, Hamish, what you've always said to me on all these podcasts is surround yourself with people with more knowledge than yourself about the topics you want them to be specialists in. And let me jump straight to you, Silas. Are we saying now that the very bastions of justice are no longer what they think they're toothless, apparently, and that fills me with dread?
Well, you raise an excellent point, Gareth, and I think if we look across not just the property industry, but the legal sector, and then, of course, criminality, we are seeing what appears to be, on the surface at the very least, a sway towards leniency. And the real issue that we have at the moment is where these particular letting agents, which is what's prompted this particular discussion, 6 letting agents, as I understand, were effectively went through the regulatory process with the Ombudsman, were issued with certain fines, and as I understand, they are not going to pay those fines, or they're choosing not to pay those fines. They're choosing not to now be regulated by the Property Ombudsman. And so the concern
hang on. Choosing not to be... I thought the whole concept was you are the regulator, you're not. I thought it was supposed to be binary. How do you choose not to be regulated? I choose not... Well, it didn't work very well with my speeding points. I choose not to be regulated by DVI. Well, I still got points.
And this is precisely it's what's the framework that sits around that. So I saw some commentary from somebody who's quite wise in the property world who said all that will happen is these letting agents will remove the Property Ombudsman banner from their website and carry on regardless. So no longer under that regulation, perhaps trading on the fringes. Are they doing anything particularly illegal? Maybe, maybe not. But it just goes that they've got a business and they're going to keep that going, regardless of whether or not they subscribe to the Property Ombudsman's framework of regulation. So what the point I'm trying to get to is effectively, where are the consequences of going either subscribing to a regulator or actually being regulated by the regulator? And this is one of the things that drives me mad when I hear all of these calls in the profession for more regulation, more regulation. We need to regulate estate agents. We need to, put them under some kind of qualification. Well, that's great. But if the enforcement element isn't there, and that enforcement element is rigorous enough, so, you and I wouldn't go and, commit a murder, for example, a very extreme example, but we know there's consequences on the back of that.
Hang on a moment. No, I wouldn't.
Right.
Just for a moment there.
There's a temptation occasionally, and some people do, blood boil to that to lose sense of reason. But we understand there's very serious consequences, or there should be. And I think this is one of the things that's playing at the heart of justice at the moment, is that people are seeing people commit crimes and then not getting punished adequately enough, or what the public would deem adequately enough. We can trace that all the way back to the property profession. If you've got 6 letting agents who are in charge of tens, scores, hundreds of properties, whose money, the tenant's money is going to them first of all, and they're being entrusted to pass that on to the landlord, we could be talking hundreds of thousands of pounds a month.
Right.
Is that money ever going to make its way to the landlord, or is the letting agent just going to abscond with all the funds, and you've got no hope of tracking them down because they're in the south of France or what have you? That's the reason why this regulatory piece is so important. And it's not about the regulation, it's about the enforcement. What's the consequences for that individual? We've also seen it this last week.
Hang on, regulation without teeth is no regulation at all, is it not?
Quite correct. And
also on top of it, to me, you're either regulated or you're not. It's binary. And if you're regulated, it shouldn't be an option. It should be. So, I'm not necessarily a great believer in regulation. What I am a believer in is, if you are going to put down something that purports to be a law, thou must work along these lines, then it must be enforceable. And it just sounds like if you can casually opt out of it, then what is the point of it? It's just breath in the wind.
Well, there was another example that's been going around the legal circles over the course of the last week, and that is where a law firm, and I will say allegedly, transferred client money into their own accounts to keep the firm going. And apparently there was a paper trail where the directors or owners of the firm had given instructions to the lower levels of staff not to actually report this issue. And that should be probably one of the biggest crimes, I'll use that word loosely, as far as a heavily regulated industry like law is concerned. And it appears that the sanctions were quite lenient based on that malpractice. And for me, it does come back to this full circle argument of, are we too lenient? Are the consequences not stringent enough for people who choose to either flout the laws entirely or, operate on the periphery? I think that this is one of the things that makes property buying and selling and ownership like the Wild West. And you can call for as much regulation as you want, but if there's no backstop behind that, it's absolutely meaningless, and it just increases costs to the consumer.
But negative behaviours, are they not covered by consumer rights legislation anyway? Is that not the final backstop?
Well, you could suggest that, and I think that's absolutely right to suggest. The question is, again, then who enforces? So I had an incident this week with one of our mutual friends. They'd given client advice. I won't disclose the full story, but they gave the client their best advice. Came to me for a second opinion. I said, "You're absolutely right. This is not just conditional selling. This is what I would view as entrapment. You're expecting a client to sign up to a contract without giving full disclosure of what they're actually agreeing to. Now, if that's not entrapment, if that's not against consumer law, I don't know what is."
Well, that is against consumer law. The essence of contractual law states that one must have completely been privy to the entire contents of the contract, not part of it.
Yeah, due consideration. And without that, of course, there is a complete failure to not only in regulate what's actually going on there, but the enforcement aspect of that. Who is going to enforce that? Because the average consumer doesn't know enough. And then the thought of then going to a lawyer to instruct them to say, can you get me justice here, could be thousands of pounds, in costs, and very threatening letters from the other side,
right?
For no avail. And I think that's the fall down.
Hamish, it seems to me that where you shook me in the green room by saying the Ombudsman is of no great teeth or whatsoever. Now, I know that we often have discussion about whether or not there's a need for regulation, greater regulation or any regulation. But there's got to be a basic rule of law which states that one is not due to suffer sharp practice within consumers, and this should whether or not the Ombudsman should be the embodiment of that. Not, I think that's probably moot. But if you're going to put something out there and purport it to be a backstop, hence giving purchasers a feeling of relief that at least they're going to be covered by something, and it turns out to have been of no point whatsoever, surely it's pointless.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what I was actually saying right at the very start is the fact there is so much inconsistency. And I mean, Silas actually reinforced what I was saying.
Right.
Very subtly, much more subtly than I'd explained it. Because they could just step away. I mean, indeed, in the same sort of way that I actually could, we are regulated. There's a regulatory body that in fact, I was wondering when it was coming up, because our renewal date is in June, and we have to make sure that everything's sort of. And if I just chose to step away from that, I could still carry on working. There are issues, but it's entirely up to, at the end of the day, it's up to the solicitor to accept searches or not, as to whether it's regulated. And they don't have to be necessarily regulated, but it will actually fall on the solicitor. But I could step away from it. We could step away from that. And obviously what I need to do is resign from IPSA, as well as resigning from the Property Codes Compliance Board. So I wouldn't be wrong to either of those two. But that wouldn't stop what I was doing, because, if you like, I have clients that will accept searches because of the quality of them. However, what we are actually sort of saying in a situation sort of like this, we do have ombudsmen, and we've sort of heard about them. We have ombudsmen which are looking at prices of gas and electricity. What's happening on those? Absolutely. They just sort of decide to put things up and down as and how they choose. They don't actually look after the interests of the general public. We have a situation here where, if you like, people can step away from it. So what we do, there is a gauge that needs to be correct, and I think this is the sad aspect about this particular one. Letting agent, I mean, for the sadness, of course, is we would like the letting agents to be responsible when they say they're going to be responsible. They are acting on behalf of the owner of these properties. And the owner of these properties has said, hey, can you do this? And they say, yes, we're acting within these parameters. Now, they've broken those parameters, but they can step away from them. There are other situations, and hopefully we will actually sort of see it, because there are regulations that people need to adhere to, and hopefully we will see a leveling out of it. But when people can step away from their responsibilities, because the Ombudsman doesn't have, what is the Ombudsman going to do? Is he going to ban them, throw them out?
But Hamish, my immediate feelings are this: many years ago I did a couple of years training as a paralegal. I thought that was going to be a new direction for me, but I would not, in no way made me an expert, but certainly gave me a healthy regard for contract law. And if one was of a mind one could theoretically put together some sort of contractual obligation between myself and the buyer and the seller and people in. If I did that, a lot of ifs there, because obviously it's time, effort, and money. But if one did that and they decide to step away from their responsibilities, then they would be held accountable under contract law.
Absolutely, yes.
But the people don't do that, do they? Because there's this casual assumption that, and this advertised effect, because we're covered by the Ombudsman, that's our backstop, therefore we're going to play ball. But in actual fact, as you've already illustrated, Hamish, it's pretty toothless. Silas, this sounds like an intolerable state of being, certainly in a marketplace that at the moment is partially damaged and partially fractured through some, I would call it the truss effect. That started some of this tumbling, and we haven't yet stopped tumbling. Surely this is just the belief that the backstop is not a backstop at all, but just words on a chalkboard. It to me seems even more deleterious.
Well, you raise a really interesting point, Gareth. And if you want to understand how broken the British system is, does anybody remember there was a politician, I forget who it was, but they said, we're going to be tough on crime, we're going to be tough on the causes of crime. You might remember who that was, I forget. But there is a video circulating online about somebody from the national press, and they went to work at the Serious Fraud Office for a while. And what they discovered was basically one hooting hoot, that there was absolutely zero teeth to the Serious Fraud Office, and people were reporting all sorts of goings on to them, and it was all just basically one big joke in the office. Get them to file this report. We'll file it away, and the report's been made to the Serious Fraud Office. You've been given a number, but there's actually nothing going to happen. And people have been hauled over the coals and incurred significant loss, millions of pounds, and it's going absolutely nowhere because you've got a body that purports to be something and is basically, jobs for the boys. And so you highlight the core point, which is around public trust. That is the most important thing, and that was what always held sacrosanct certainly for as long as I've been alive. And over recent years, that seems to have been watered down to now taking liberties with the public's trust. That there is a body, it's meant to be there for enforcement, it's meant to be there for regulation, it's meant to be there to hold people accountable. And the unfortunate part about it is it's smoke and mirrors. There's nothing of substance there behind it. And that's not all bodies, of course, but there is certainly more and more questions coming out recently over the effectiveness of these bodies. What do they actually stand for? Who do they actually purport to represent? You could even take it as far as Property Mark having Angela Rayner as a guest speaker there recently, cozying up to Rightmove. There's a lot of concern within the property industry around that sort of relationship. Who is actually standing for the public? And I think where you've got situations where, what is it now, a crime? Sorry, if you're doing shoplifting for less than £200 in value, that's no longer a crime. There's no consequences. There are people walking out of court who have committed quite serious offences and, getting a slap on the wrist. So I think the pendulum has swung very far in the liberal direction. And I'm not so sure that that's really benefiting you or I as consumers, because we live in a world now where we think there's protection, but actually when we go to call upon it, it doesn't actually exist. And that's a very...
Yes, it is like Scotch mist. We do have a comment from a friend of the show, Spencer, who says, when organisations ignore the Ombudsman's findings, especially in cases involving vulnerable individuals, of which he is one, how do we justify the erosion of accountability where should the real consequences threshold sit before regulatory intervention becomes non-negotiable? Can I throw this first of all to you, Hamish?
Well, I think, I mean, you mentioned it earlier with your paralegal experience. If there's a contract and that contract has been signed and that has actually been, that's a valid contract, there is something to stand on. The Ombudsman is not really in a similar sort of type of situation necessarily. They have said they'll be guided by the Ombudsman, but they don't actually have them. I mean, this is the challenge. And I think Michelle is a prime example who
Yes.
actually had on earlier this week. She
Absolutely.
does an awful lot of work working with clients, particularly subcontractors, to ensure that they get the right contract signed. And that is, that is definable in law. You need to bring into a solicitor, but you cover yourself by actually sort of doing it. And therefore, really, the Ombudsman does need to have teeth, because we see some serious things. And of course, I mean, what was demonstrated, and we know it does actually sort of go on within estate agency, sad to say. It's not the only one, but we did have that panorama program which outlined it. It was no surprise to any of us who know what...
No, that was, what got me afterwards when I spoke to you, Hamish, and I think it might have been you, Silas, and a couple of other people, and I said, I think Chris, friend of the show, as well, and I said, but this is ridiculous. This is outlandish practice. This is sharp practice. This is obvious. This is like Wild West stuff. And I think Hamish said, it's been around for years. It's almost normal. And Silas, I think you said at the time, it shouldn't be normal, but it is.
Yeah, it's like the worst kept secret in the whole property industry, that everybody knows it's going on and everybody just turns a blind eye to it. And I mean, imagine the scenario where you've got the largest estate agency practice in the country caught on camera doing this sort of nefarious activity. And the outcry from the industry is just to warn the consumer that this sort of thing goes on, and this is how to spot it, this is how to avoid it, but absolutely silent on the consequences to the UK's biggest agent. Being caught on camera, televised to the entire nation, of course. Nothing happened as a result of that, and we're sort of 12, 14.
I think there were a couple of slightly rosy cheeks, but beyond that, sweet Fanny Adams.
Exactly, and that is extremely damaging for consumer trust, because estate agents already suffer with the reputation, and the common misnomer is that they're all the same. You can't trust an estate agent. The statistics point to the fact that the estate agents are trusted half as the level of half the trust of the average man in the street. That is a damning statistic for the industry. And so, yeah, we can't justify any of this sort of erosion of accountability, as Spencer suggests here. It can't be justified. It doesn't work. The industry's already spiraling. We've got the worst of the worst leading the field, and to the consumer be damned is pretty much the attitude of everyone in the industry, and that's really sad.
Well, Hamish, please find me a happy note on which to end this podcast. That's not the first syllable I was looking for, Hamish. Yay!
I struggle there. What it is, it is creating accountability there. I mean, individuals themselves. I think it's an attitude of mind, and I think it's a lot of work that we need to go through in society. We're not just. I mean, we're speaking about examples here. How many situations have gone through with the complications of what these letting agents have to go through now, right, as a consequence of what the government sort of actually brought in over the last 5 to 10 years, when you look at that and there's that few, what the heck are we really sort of speaking about? But what it is, of course, it does argue to the fact that, hey, look, this is not the contracting law. The fact that they've said that the Ombudsman sat over there. I mean, I had a serious scenario with my telephone line many years ago, and the Ombudsman really wasn't interested, but it was absolute load of cobblers. I mean, at the end of the day, the telephone company, they went away. No compensation was paid. Yet, however, they got away with it. They're no longer trading now.
As far as I can see, with that, certainly in the telecoms industry, compensation is a wet finger in the wind. And so I'm impressed they even accountants talking about it, let alone giving you any. Thank you so much for those well irritating comments, which turns out that half the industry already realized, well, half the world already realizes. Us poor gentle consumer like myself, I still find it shocking, and yet nothing changes. I won't mention them by name, but the estate agent as vilified almost within I think they laughed it off. Frankly, I think they laughed it off, and it wouldn't surprise me, Silas, if they've continued in those sharp practices to this day. What I would say is, and I'm going to repeat it ad nauseum, and Hamish, I think you'll probably bang the same drum, and as you, Silas, surround yourself with trusted people who know what the flip they're talking about. Do a bit of research, and I would say look into a contract law. If you really want to take someone on, ask them would they sign on the dotted line and agree to be bound by it. That's the only way you're going to do it. And if you don't do that, then I'm afraid you pay your money, you take your choice. But on that note, I'd like to thank you all for watching. Oh, God. Thank you all for watching. I look forward to tomorrow's Cladding Matters. That's usually a very good one. Please to watch. That's 1 o'clock tomorrow. And until next week, thank you, Silas. See you tomorrow, Hamish. And to you watching, keep your feet on the ground. Keep reaching for the stars. And in these troubling times, please try and look after your mental health. Until next time. Bye-bye.